The room goes quiet before he says it. 70 years of silence doesn't break ice. Kevin Costner looks down, takes a breath, and for a moment you can almost hear the weight of decades pressing against his chest. This isn't an award speech. This isn't nostalgia. This is something unresolved. And when he finally speaks about Rob Reiner, you realize this story was never about movies. It was about trust, power, and a moment that changed everything. Back in the late 1980s, Hollywood felt smaller, tighter, almost familial. Kevin Costner was rising fast, the kind of ascent that makes studios nervous and audiences loyal. Rob Reiner was already a kingmaker, the director everyone trusted with stories that mattered. When their paths crossed, people expected magic. Two storytellers, both driven by something deeper than box office numbers. But behind closed doors, something else was forming, something fragile. Kevin remembers the first meeting clearly. The handshake was firm, the smile practiced. Rob talked about vision, about legacy, about making something that would last longer than either of them. Kevin listened, nodded, believed, because at that point in his life, belief came easy. He wanted to be part of something meaningful, not just successful. He wanted to matter. What no one tells you is that Hollywood friendships often begin as collaborations and end as quiet betrayals. The project they discussed never quite became what Kevin thought it would be. Scripts changed, conversations shifted, decisions were made in rooms Kevin wasn't invited into anymore. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, he felt himself being pushed to the edges of a story he thought he was helping to tell. There's a moment, Kevin describes, where everything clicked. He was standing alone on a soundstage, lights dimmed, crew gone for the night. He realized he hadn't been asked for input in weeks, not because he didn't care, but because his voice no longer fit the narrative being shaped. That realization didn't come with anger. It came with something worse: disappointment. For years, fans speculated, why did they never work together again? Why did Kevin deflect whenever Rob's name came up in interviews? The truth is, silence was easier than reopening a wound that never healed properly. Kevin kept working, building an iconic career, collecting accolades, smiles, applause, but some nights, he says, he replayed those early conversations in his head, wondering where the road split. Rob Reiner, from the outside, appeared unchanged, still respected, still powerful, still telling stories about loyalty and friendship. And that contrast ate at Kevin more than any public fallout ever could. Because how do you explain a fracture no one else saw? How do you speak about hurt when the world insists everything turned out fine? At 70, something shifted. Maybe it was age. Maybe it was the quiet that comes when the noise of proving yourself finally fades. Kevin realized he didn't need vindication. He needed honesty, not for the audience, but for himself. He talks about how holding on to unspoken truths can harden you in ways you don't notice until it's almost too late. He doesn't accuse, he doesn't attack. That's what makes his words heavier. He talks about expectations mismatched, about respect assumed but not returned. He admits he stayed quiet because he didn't want to seem ungrateful or bitter. But silence, he learned, has a cost. It teaches you to swallow parts of your own story. There's an emotional pause when he says, Rob probably doesn't even know how deeply it affected him. That's the twist no one expects. This wasn't a dramatic blow-up. There was no shouting match, no public feud, just a slow erosion of trust that never got named. And when something isn't named, it lingers. Kevin wonders aloud if things would have been different if he'd spoken up sooner, if honesty back then could have saved something, or if the system itself was never built to allow equal voices once power tilts in one direction. He doesn't claim to have the answers. He only knows what it felt like to lose faith quietly. As he finishes, there's no grand conclusion, just a simple truth. Success doesn't protect you from disappointment. Time doesn't automatically heal what was never addressed. And sometimes, the stories that stay with us the longest aren't the ones that made us famous, but the ones we never got to finish telling. So the question lingers. How many collaborations fall apart without anyone ever knowing why? How many people carry untold versions of their own past, waiting for the moment they finally feel safe enough to speak? And when that moment comes, will it bring closure or just clarity?